Welcome to Building SaaS with Python and Django. My name is Matt Lehman, and on this stream we work on Django apps and building software as a service. That's what SaaS stands for. Tonight we're going to work on some customer requested features and kind of take a break from working on a feature, which is normally the progression of things. I normally try to work on longer running features so you can see how they get built out for an application. But today is a little bit more relaxed and looking at just some usability things that have been reported for my application. So if you've never joined me before, I'm building a homeschool application that is used by my family and others. My family does homeschooling, and it's a scheduling application. So that's the domain that we're working on. You don't need to know a lot about homeschooling in order to follow along, though. Most of this stuff is I walk you through code and using Django and Python. So you're free to ask me anything about Python, Django, or web development. Hello, John. Welcome. About Python, Django, or web dev. Leaving a comment there so folks join in later. And let's get going, shall we? So tonight I want to work on just some quality of life changes that have been reported by my spouse, who's my primary customer, and we'll dig into that. Blah blah. I see your question there. Let me take a quick look at it. It's got some words to it. Python Anywhere. You know, I don't actually have experience with Python Anywhere. I don't know if you follow me on Twitter, but I don't know if you saw the announcement either that Heroku has changed their plans. And I've been a big advocate of Heroku for quite a long time as a platform as a service, partly because they had a free tier that was easy to get started. So you could be like a hobbyist and be learning how to do building apps. And then if you needed your app to be more and actually serve customers, then you could start paying them. But they recently made an announcement where they're not going to support the free tier at all anymore. So I have a really hard time recommending them going forward. And so I too have been thinking about like what are some alternatives that could be used. I don't personally have experience with Python Anywhere. I've not heard anything bad about the service, but I also conversely have not heard anything necessarily good. I mean, it's not like one way or the other. It's some kind of indifferent on it. So I don't know their pricing and I don't know how they operate. So I'm kind of deferring to you all about that stuff. What I did do is I did immediately look for what other options are out there that fall into the same sort of arena as Heroku, because I think what I am a big advocate for, regardless of the platform, is having some kind of platform as a service. Well, $5 as a starting point for databases. That sounds pretty good for a starting point. And my recommendation is to use a platform as a service, mostly because if you go a lower level route, like John has suggested, John, your suggestion is totally fine. But I think that someone who's coming at this new and has maybe never deployed an application before, if you take AWS and you try and like you log into the console, you're kind of given just, I think they have hundreds of services now that you can use. And so that experience is like maybe overwhelming for a new person. So whereas a platform as a service kind of packages it all up together and does a lot for you. Miraj, you're welcome. I'm glad you're here, and good to see you joining in again. So I looked for an alternative to Heroku that kind of offer that same experience of let's put it all together for you in one place. And the trade-off with that usually is cost. Like you can find a fairly low cost to it, but if you did know how to do everything on AWS, you could probably get something cheaper. So my exploration led me to fly.io, and it was a pretty slick experience. The documentation was really good. The command that you install, this flyctl, which also aliases just to fly, which is really nice, 3 characters, was really, really well done. And so I wasn't deploying a Django app. This is where I can't really make the comparison to Python Anywhere. I was doing a side project where I'm building a web framework in Lua that is of my own creation. So I needed to put my stuff into a Docker file because nobody builds Lua build packs and stuff. It's the Lua ecosystem, and the reason I picked it for my side project is because it's sort of this more open space of what's available, what's done. It's not paved roads, and that was my intent. Is to like, let me see if I can plow my own field, I guess. So, but I did have a good experience with Fly, and their pricing seemed reasonable. Oh, there was the link. So I will probably in the future look to recommend this kind of service as an alternative for hosting. I don't have tons of experience with them yet, so I'm not going to come out right and like update all of my documentations to switch from Heroku to Fly. That's not where I'm at today. But I'm really kind of bummed that Heroku decided to kill off their free tier. They claim it was to deal with like fraud and waste and people really abusing their system, and maybe that's true. But it's just a bummer because I think that particular service for a long time was kind of like the champion of somebody starting something new. So it's sad to see that go. Which I mean, I guess is an opportunity for these other smaller players to pick up some of the space. For my particular app, I'm going to continue to run it on Heroku because I was already paying them. So it is still a good quality service. And so if you know right at the gate that you are going to be putting something out there that you want people to pay for, and you're ready to do that, it's a good platform. So I'm not going to knock it in that regard, but it's just too bad that they don't offer that entry tier. Oh, Giant, yeah, that's certainly sounds like a possibility. I can't imagine being on the other end of that equation and trying to offer the service. It does sound like it's ripe for abuse. And John, I definitely agree. Like AWS, so there's a certain point at which like company size comes into play. Like if you're building something that you're a venture-backed startup like where I work, you really invest heavily into customizing things because you need to optimize for costs and you need lots of services. And the platform as a service route would not really scale very far. Like for instance, I don't know of any of these services supply stuff in the arena of what am I looking for? Machine learning. And my company does a lot of machine learning to provide better healthcare experiences and like analyzing data to make sure that we connect people to the right clinicians that they need to get connected to. And we run tons of data models and stuff like that. And if we did all of that on a platform as a service, I think we'd be getting killed by price. It's already really expensive. Yep, Terraform is a great tool for dealing with a lot of AWS stuff. There's tons of good paths if you want to go the more complicated route. So appreciate the question, blah blah. Like that was a good little detour. I'm interested if you do try out Python Anywhere to any serious level. Please do report back. I'm eager to hear how it went. So let's pivot and look at the actual issue for this evening, because like I said at the start, I want to get into a couple of customer issues, and I want to fix up an issue that my wife reported on recently. This is kind of top of mind to her, and one that's very manageable. So let's dig into what this is. What I'm going to do to get this going is we're going to fire up the application. We're going to illustrate the problem, and then we'll get down into fixing it. The short version of the problem is that deleting on a certain page has a navigation usability problem where in a normal operation, like on an edit or something, the application will return the user back to a long list, because in the application there are courses. So the model of this application is a school years, and grade levels, and then within the grade levels there are different courses like math or science or anything like that. And the course is for the entirety of the school year. So you can imagine, kids go to school on average 5 days a week for most of the year, and that gets into the hundreds in terms of tasks. So it's easy in this course listing page to get pretty lost in where all the stuff is, or to have to do a bunch of scrolling. So one of the things that I tried to add to the application to make the experience nicer is that if there are operations that take the user away from this listing page, like an edit on a task that's part of the course, that it comes back to that spot. And so what my wife reported is that one of these operations I missed, basically. And it's the fact that when something is deleted, it doesn't come back to that spot, which on some level is sensible, because a lot of times if you're doing like say you're doing an edit on a task, you have the ID, and so I've got some essentially some anchor tags that exist on the listing page that allow with a query string, or not a query string, with a what's it called, a URL fragment. So using the pound sign, I can jump straight back down to that point in the list. And that's the technique that I'm using to navigate back into this list format. But with a delete operation, you can see how that actually gets a little bit harder, because knowing what to put in that hash mark after something's been deleted is a little bit up in the air. And so I think what I'm going to do to fix the problem is actually try to look to a previous task. So the application has a notion of ordering, and I have a Django package called Django ordered model, I think it is, that gives a query set that lets you look at the previous and next in a list. And so what I'm going to do is before the delete operation, I will look for the previous entry, and if there is one, I will essentially pull its ID so that after the delete is over, we can set the page so that it will go back to the entry that's like -1. So that way that my spouse will be able to see roughly where she left off from. So that's the idea. All right, so let's get into it. Let's see how this is working and get going. I did some other changes on my other machine, so I'm doing a poll, and I've got some requirements changes. So let's go ahead and like do an update really quickly. It shouldn't take too long. And if you recall from other streams, I've got some custom stuff on this M1 that requires some different load flags. And so I need to search for my pip install command, because it's got some special C flags. So we're going to do 211. We'll just get stuff up to date with where it is. Hopefully it's got to build the Graphiz stuff, and that the Graphiz package was actually the one that required those flags. Yes, Django ordered model is totally awesome. It is a very powerful library for quickly adding special ordering features that go above and beyond what Django is. So totally agree with you there. All right, so let's start up the web server, and let's fire it up over in the browser. And we're going to need a little bit of extra data that we don't have in the app right now, because the problem can't really be illustrated at the moment. So let's jump into this math class for Mark. And what I need is something that scrolls for quite a long time. So we're going to go to add a new task. I'll get to your question in just a moment, Giant. And we're going to do a bulk create option down here, or actually just this replication feature. And I want to change this to something a bit more realistic. So we're going to blow it up quite a bit by adding 150 tasks. And then we're going to start the numbering at task 11, because we already have tasks 1 through 10. So this should give us, if I know my math properly, it should be 160, right? And, you know, what can we say? I don't think I even need to say a description. That was the point. No, I do. I need to say task, at least that much. So it should be task, and then the number gets added after that. So it's going to take a second, but we've got now our tasks. And now that I've got that data, I'll get back to your question, Giant. So do I use Django cookie cutter from PyDanny? The answer is no, I don't. And the reason is not because I don't like it. I think PyDanny, he and the Feldroys, he and his wife, do pretty amazing work for Django. They're also the authors of 2 Scoops of Django, which is a really fantastic book that I would recommend highly. And so there's nothing wrong with anything that they've produced. It's just that I personally don't make enough Django projects to merit using it. And there are some of my own personal preferences in there with like tools and packages that I like that have kind of gone their own path. So I don't use that cookie cutter, but thus I can't recommend it or be just like earlier with the Python Anywhere. I can't be really for or against it because I haven't used it. But knowing those individuals, there's probably some good stuff in there, and it's probably a good starting point. So people should check it out if they haven't. It's cookie cutter's a pretty. I think cookie cutter. I want to say Audrey, who's Audrey and Danny. They're the pair. I think she is the original author of Cookie Cutter. So really awesome tool that she created. And then I think Django is like the layer on top that is a template essentially that they built. Okay, so we have 160 tasks here, and I think we can illustrate the problem in a couple of ways. So first, let's do like the dynamic approach. So I have some HTMX in here. So if we delete task 43, I should have gotten a prompt. What's going on here? Delete this task. There we go. I just didn't click the button. Yes, both Danny and Audrey are awesome. They're good people. So I've got HTMX. So if a user clicks the delete button here and hits OK, I've got it so that it will dynamically delete something there. Although I'm noticing that oh no, that's the right numbering. It's confusing me because we've got the indexes off, but that's correct. That's what should have happened. And so that's one way. And that dynamic delete is, as you can see, there's no change in position because the user never even leaves the page. So I do some Ajax stuff, or I guess, is it still called Ajax now? If it's like, I don't know if is that the right term anymore? I'm such an old school, like at least I didn't say XHR. Like it's not an XHR. It's a dynamic fetch now. Like the fetch API is a thing in the web these days. So we don't have to use XHR, and it's not really, I guess it's asynchronous JavaScript. I'm getting into semantics. It doesn't really matter. But the point is like that's the cleanest version of this. And so I was a little confused at first when she wrote me saying like this delete doesn't get her to the place she wants. But I learned what it is she was doing that was like, I asked her like, wow, how did you even get to this kind of spot? And so when you click this task, it takes you to an edit page. And it was here that she kind of made some changes or something that merited this. So she will occasionally go into a task, and it's like let's say it's like a reading assignment. And so maybe it was chapters in a book, and it's chapters 3 and 4, and so, or 3 through 5, or some kind of range. And one of my kids, whoever was assigned it, did some portion of the reading and maybe didn't finish another or something like that. And so she has this need periodically, which is probably a longer term issue I need to figure out, but I'm not doing that tonight, to split tasks. And so essentially take the description from one and kind of manipulate little bits to change the range from 3 to 5 to 4 to 5. And periodically, though, she says that in this process of splitting, she creates this like extra task that she didn't really need and is ready to delete. So it's here that if she clicks this delete button, it was not taking her to the right spot. Now, I'm looking at this, and maybe it's just a bug because oh no, I see the problem. So look at here's the issue. It's maybe a little hard to notice. So I already have a lot of these places. My technique for jumping back to the right spot is to put a URL that is already in the right format. In this case, the delete button has a next URL in it currently that is back to the courses page, which is the listing that we were just looking at. And then you can see on the bottom URL bar that it has hash task dash QL000LI. The reason that that's not working, though, is because that's the current task that we're about to delete. And so that makes sense that as soon as this task is deleted, this hash will no longer make sense. Like that, this task will be gone. So having a hash, it'll take us to that. Let's go ahead and delete it. and we're going to confirm, and it takes us back to that page, and it has the right hash thing in here, but this ID is now wrong. All right, so this is actually a different problem than I originally set out to solve. Like, we're going to have to find a way to go into that edit page and change this essentially to not be the current task, but to be the previous task. So this might actually be a template update of all things. We'll have to see. So let's go to, let's take a look at the template. It's been a long time since I've actually looked at this template, so I could be off on here. So we're going to go, this is the course task edit page. Courses, course task. Oh man, which one is it? Course task form? That sounds right. So we've got, yeah. All right. So here's the sign that you can tell that this is what it is, because it's got add and it's got edit. So in here somewhere should be a delete. And you can see that it's a task delete, and it puts a next on here. And the next is pulling from this next. Huh. Okay. So maybe what we really need to do. Fascinating. So this is what I did. What I must have done is plumb this all the way through, and that's going to be kind of tricky. So here's what's really happening. If I hover over here, now you can see what's happening. This task number 1, for example, must have an ID of DV5B65P. And so that is propagated to this page as a next URL here. The problem is that that's used in multiple spots. So it's used for the cancel button, but it's also used for the delete button. But as I just noted a moment ago, it doesn't make sense for the delete button. No, it does make sense for the cancel button. So it jumps you back to that first task, and that cut out the header there. So, but let's do it on 23, just so we can really clearly see. Like, this is much deeper in the page. If I hit cancel, it jumps you straight to 23. So we don't want to break that behavior. That's important to maintain. So we're going to have to do something different on that task. And I think the challenge is, oh man, this is trickier than I thought. The challenge is this. This is not the only way to get to that edit page. So we can't just assume that we want to go back to the course listing page, because there are other ways to get here. What's another way? We have this week view. Here's tasks over here. So I think, well, I thought you could click on these. Maybe it's the daily page. Huh. Maybe I took those links out. All right, I thought there were other ways to get to this task edit page. There probably are, which is probably why it's written that way. But I was mistaken that it's not through this route. But I'm pretty confident that it exists. So we can't just blow this away and say, yeah, you're going to be get next. What I think we need to do, oh man, we might need to have like multiple options here. Because like I said, we also can't mess up the cancel option. So the edit page, this link, we might need to put multiple things in the URL, not just a single next, but like a delete next or something along those lines, and separate them. And then the regular next could be used for this cancel page, but a delete next could be used if it exists. It gets really ugly. And I'm not convincing myself that that's the right thing to do. So let me pause, for a second and think, is there another way that we could or should implement this? So part of me is feeling like, one part is like, there's more logic that's here. So putting this in the template feels wrong. Like I could add an extra if statement in a template, but it's starting to feel like, oh, that doesn't really go there. So there might be some refactoring that we want to do, at least from the get-go, to say this whole chunk should probably come out and become a delete URL context variable. That might be a pain in the rear, but it might not be. So that's one thing that's going through my head right now. And if we move that out to a context variable, that gives us a little bit more control. That puts us back in Python land rather than Django template land. And we can make different decisions there. It might ultimately be the same decision, but I would rather have a bunch of logic be pushed into the view than handled in this template itself. And that's feeling like the more logical path to me. So let's bring up the view that goes along with this so we can start staring at that as well. So it's going to be a course views, I believe. And this is a task, some kind of task view, task form. Not the create version, we want the other one. So there's going to be another one of these for edit. Because notice over here, this delete URL, well, you wouldn't necessarily know this, but I know this. This create variable is only true, set to true on the create page. So earlier, where is it? So here's the create course task create view, and then you can see in the context that I add this create variable to do some logic. And that's because I'm trying to reuse the form template as much as possible, which is adding an extra layer of complexity to this whole template. So let's go to the course task edit. Oh man, I don't have that anymore. Course task, where else is this form? Is it update maybe? What do I call it? Yeah, call it update. So we're right here. And here is where we might want to insert some additional context. Alternatively, no. I was about to suggest maybe we could change the delete view and just have the delete view look send it back to the course list. But I think the delete view is doing the same thing. It's handling that next URL down the pipe. And so each one of those has to like try and pass it along to the next thing. So we're really getting down to like, I think we're going to end up manipulating the next URL before we set it. Oh man, that's starting to get gross. But it might be what we need to do. There's kind of some parsing that has to happen here. But I think it might be unavoidable. Blah. What I thought was going to be like this really walk in the park, easy problem turns out to be difficult. Okay, let's just tackle this one bit at a time. I'm pretty confident that I want there to be a delete URL, and that needs to come from this. So that is step one. So let's make a These kind of attributes are with the form itself, so I don't want to mess with those. Let's put it right here, and we're going to call it, make sure it's known that it's like a private thing, get delete URL. Get the delete URL. Adjust the task fragment to point to the previous task. It feels wrong, but I can't think of any other way to resolve this at the moment. Maybe I'll have some brilliant brainwave along the way, but we're going to march on this path for a moment. And for the time being, I'm just going to dump this in here so we have that kind of locally to work with. And then in here, I'm going to take all of this content. And this is actually a nice little cleanup that we'll get out of this. Is we'll change all of that to be delete URL. So that gets significantly cleaner looking in the template. It just means that we've moved the mess over here. We have to address that ourselves. So I think perhaps the first thing to do is, like, let's not break stuff. So the very first thing, before trying to add in new logic, don't do two things at once, is replicate this behavior that is represented by this template. So we need to return a string that looks like this task delete thing. And so it's task delete. So we're going to say locally we've got delete URL. Oh my goodness. Delete URL. And it is a reverse on. I'm hesitating because there was a cool thing that somebody pointed out on a previous stream, and I want to try and use it again because I liked some attributes of it, but I forget the name of it. It's like match URL. So in the Django docs, there is in the shortcuts module, wasn't resolve. It wasn't reverse or redirect. It was like a fourth thing called match URL or something like that. Is it not documented? What? Maybe they don't want people using it. Well, that's weird. All right, let's go look at the code. So shortcuts. It was hiding in here. Here it is, resolve URL. Is that in there? Resolve. Wow, an undocumented shortcut. What the heck? Why is that? Okay, well, resolve URL is pretty slick. So what I liked about it is that it's doing a bunch of, it's a little bit magical, but what it leaves you with is, in my opinion, a nicer API than the reverse. So if you think about reverse, I'm sure you've used reverse before if you've done any work with Django. Reverse takes the name of the view that you, or the name of the URL that you want to use. So that would be, in this case, it would be courses task delete. You can see that right above in that little template fragment. So that's the first thing. And then if you want to do the other stuff, like the other attributes that go in here, in this case, it looks like it's the course ID and the course task ID, you would pass in this args keyword argument, which itself is a list, and then it would be something like course, and I know I don't have these locally yet, so this is not going to quite, my editor is going to yell at me, but it's the general idea. And it would look like this: course task and course ID, like that. and then you'd close it off, and that's the reverse, and that's fine. But the API itself looks a little bit like, I got this args thing in there. It's very generic, and that's not really what I'm after. What I'm really after, it'd be nice if I could specify what is this really. And so if you look at the course's URLs and look at task delete, which is right here, you can see that the arguments are actually, the first one is course ID, and the second is PK. So if you're using, instead of like reverse, instead if you did URL with, what was it called? Resolve URL, right? Yeah, resolve URL. Then what you can do is you give it the same name of courses task delete, but what you do after that is different. This is where you can pass in the keyword arguments as they would be expected by the URL, in which case it is, as I said, course ID, and I'm going to put just a number here in here just as a stand-in for the moment, and then PK. So I think that leads to a considerably nicer looking chunk of code to read, because you know semantically what the arguments are going into the reverse. So I'm going to use that. So, but I need to get it. So it's from shortcuts, import resolve URL. Okay. Now we also need, in order to finish this off, when we're done with that URLs, we need the course ID and the course task ID. And so let's look at that. So this is a course task form. So that means that the object thing that's attached to this is the course task. So down here in get URL, what we can really do is, instead of course ID, you would say self.object.course, and we don't need to access the whole object. We can just do it that way. And then here it's self.object.pk. I hope this makes sense, what's going on. And then we want to return this delete URL. Now we're not done. All I did was essentially up to this first part right here. We haven't done anything with the if block, but we did do the Django view equivalent of the URL template tag. Now let's save that, and then now we got some more to do. So we want to say, we have to translate the request get. So if it has a next parameter, that's what this if block is doing. So we want to say if next in self.request.get. Look in the query dict and look for the next key. All right, so then we know that what we want to put on there is to take delete URL and do a plus equal of, I guess we could do a format string with question mark next equal self request get next. Is that going to work? No, it's not going to work. I know what. So remember, we're now in Python land, so we're not in like magic template land where dot will solve all your problems. This thing is no longer, I think, no longer accessible with attribute access. Although I said I think because maybe query dict behaves in ways that I don't expect. I don't know the full API of query dict. I think it's got some funniness to it. It's not like a pure dictionary, but I don't think it can just do raw attribute access. So I think that in order to get this right, I think we need to do this. We need to switch it to look like a dictionary access, because that's what it is. Now, I squinted at this for a little bit because I have some concerns that this won't be quite equivalent to that line that we had. Because I don't know if the template syntax is going to be doing some escaping. So let's do this. Let's take this link. Let's put two of them, put them side by side, and do like a shootout. We're going to go all the way and change this. The first one is going to be the thing that we just created. It's going to use the delete URL. And the second one will continue to use the original format. Okay. Kind of a crude test, but it should get the job done. And we need to put the delete URL into the context. And I'll come back and test this later, of course, but this is at just the moment we're just trying to get it done. So self get delete URL. Next must be a string. Yep. Oh, thanks. Thank you, Wallison. Which starts to look absurd. So I think let's do this. I'm doing too much magic in that that f string. So let's do this properly. Let's do this in what I think is a clearer style that will be more obvious. It would have shown me my error, I believe, that you're pointing out accurately. So let's do that, and then change everything in here to be next URL. Okay. Appreciate that. Good eye. Okay, so now we're going to come back to this page over here, and I'm going to refresh. There should be two delete buttons. Whoa! Course task has no attribute. Course PK? What? Come on. We've got object. Oh, it's not PK. All right, you got me. It's ID. Course ID. There it is. Okay. Now, what I can't tell is they look the same if I hover over them, but I don't know if the markup is the same. I don't know why I'm being paranoid about this. It's probably like way overkill, but I would just like to have the confidence that it's the same. Maybe that's silly of me. Looks the same to me, so that's good news. I was afraid that it might do like something with might do some escaping differently between the Python side and the template side, but I think I'm proving to myself that that's not the case. Okay, so with that being done, I think we're ready to go ahead and delete this, which means we're at like parity with what was before. Now here's where I get a little worried that what I'm doing is bending the rules too much. The next URL is supposed to be this kind of like opaque thing. Like I'm not necessarily supposed to know what's in it. And what I'm about to do is essentially take my knowledge of the system and say, I know there's a good chance that this URL will have a fragment on it that says task dash, and I'm going to replace that with the ID of this task with the ID of the previous task. And that feels a little gross. More than a little. I'm trying to think if I can do this without parsing, or if I can be a little stupid about it. Because I have a couple of strategies in mind. One of them is a little overly aggressive. So here's the two strategies. Let's put these in the comments, I guess. One way to do this is we could say we've already got the next URL. So now we could, so option one, which is the perhaps longer option, is parse the next URL, find the query fragment, which is again, that's the part that will look like hash task dash ABCDEF, whatever the ID is. That's the hash fragment. And then replace the query fragment with the new fragment. So that's one strategy. Option two. Option two is to do a dumber version of this, which is basically replace ID of current task with ID of previous task. Now, how could that, I think of those two routes, just look at, there's more to do with option one. Parsing, it doesn't mean we can't do it. I think there are tools in the standard library that would give us the ability to get that information out and then put it back together so deconstruct it, like get the information, change the part that we know we want to change, and then reconstruct it. But it's clearly more work. Option two, on the other hand, is shorter and simpler, but it might blow up in my face. And the reason it might blow up in my face is perhaps we could be in a situation where we have tasks A, B, C, D, E, F, some kind of query string, next equal, it gets even more complicated because there's a next URL. It's not even this, sugar. Okay. Anyway, I'll continue this line of thought. So next equal courses something 1, 2, 3, 4, and then tasks, and then A, B, C, D, E, F, and then like end that, and then have task A, B, C, D, E, F. Okay, I'm trying to be like, this is a nonsense URL, but I hope it illustrates the point is that if I take this strategy of saying anytime there is A, B, C, D, E, F, which is the ID of the task, I replace it with the previous task of, G, H, I, J, K, L, something like that, whatever the ID is of the previous task, then I would be over replacing it by three times in this contrived example. But as I was even typing it out, I saw the problem with that. It's like, this is not a simple thing of parse one URL. Like, we go back to the original thing. This is the fragment is on a query string on a previous URL. So even if I did a parsing, I would have to take the knowledge that it's not this URL that I want to parse, but the next URL that is in a query string parameter. So that is way too much knowledge of what's going on in my mind. So I think what I'm going to do is, let me look at this. Oh, I already see the problem. It's not going to work. Look, this would have been bad. This would have been a bad bug. If I took that strategy of just replacing it all, it would replace this here, 7x5 ADNE, and this here. But the problem is the user wants to click this and go to the delete page. And so it would take they'd click it, and they'd actually go to the delete page of the previous task, which is absolutely not what they want. So how can I work around this? The only way, I'm sure there's more, but the way that I'm seeing to work around this is to abuse my knowledge that it has a stable prefix on it. So I could leave this here, the /ID/ stuff, and say, look for task-ID, and replace that with task-previous ID. And then I think it gets the effect that we want, because it will only manipulate this. Again, feels kind of gross, but this is a very special case part of the app. Like we're in one view on this one little private method here. So I think I'm okay with this. All right, let's do it. Let's do that. That's the strategy we're going to go with. We're going to replace all of task A, B, C, D, E, F, because it's the simplest thing I can think of. So we want to do next URL equal. Didn't we just see we did. There was a new string method that I just had last stream. What was it called? Was it called replace? I really just did I just did this like last stream, didn't I? Oh, come on. We had to do some kind of substitution. What was I doing? It might have been a couple streams ago. Thinking for a minute. It's not coming back to me. Let's go to the, yeah, you can, definitely was here. I don't have a lot of search history on this computer yet. There's definitely built-in types. And it was a string method that was added in like Python 3.8 that does like exactly what we want to do. Stir. It's good just to get down to this section. Oh no, it was this. Okay, that's not what we want. This was cool, but it's, if you've not seen this before, I'll highlight it again. It was a really cool feature. We were looking to, I was doing a replace, and it was doing the wrong thing. But we wanted a different suffix. We wanted to, yeah. What we want, this is what we really want. We want string replace. All right. So we need to look and get the previous object. So we can say, you can see, this is where Django ordered model comes in. You can see previous right here. But there's a chance that previous can be null. Like if you're the first in the list, I'm pretty sure I say null. I think it can return none, is what I should have said. Let me see if I can hover on, there's a type annotation on this. Or a doc string. No, not finding it. Okay. So I think what we need, the best we can do, we only want to replace the ID if there's a previous one. Otherwise, we want to leave the next URL alone. We don't want to touch it. So here, let's do if, well, first thing we'll do is say previous task is equal to self object previous. So if there's a previous task, that's when we want to do something different. And now that we're in here, we want to say next URL is equal to next URL replace. And we want to take our old string, which again, we're going to use the task prefix. We're going to take advantage of the knowledge. I'm going to document this too, because I'm going to forget this down the road for sure. So we're going to say, do an f string of task dash self object ID, which should be that string ID, it should stringify. And we want to replace it with task, an f string of task previous task ID. I think if you don't include a count, which we don't want to, if the optional argument count is given, sorry, but if we don't include it, it's going to replace them all, which is fine. So I think we're done with this knowledge here. And then to do document what the heck I'm doing, that's what we're after. All right. Okay, so in the background, the web server is still running, so I should be able to replace this. I deleted the extra line in the template, so we're down to, we should be down to one delete block. And if all goes well, this should remain the same, but this should be different. So let's see if it worked. So there's remaining the same. And then GXG, or I presume that's the right one. I don't know, but I can confirm, I suppose. So this is task 22. Let's go back to the list for a moment, and then task 21. Yeah, or QXG. I was missing the tail on that character. 4B50, which is what we saw. QXG 4B50. All right, cool. I think that did what we wanted it to do. So I think at this point, I'm going to test the behavior, and then we'll do a little write-up. And then I need to actually write this test code, because I'm sure that this code has no test coverage, and it needs to. It really should have test coverage. The problem with the test is that, let's imagine that I, in some future, decide, actually, I wanted this prefix to be course task, not just task. Well, this assumption right here is now baked into this chunk of code, and short of me extracting this prefix out and putting it in some kind of global constant so that if I had changed it, I'm going to get burned by that. Now, I'm pretty convinced that I'm never going to change this ever. So I think it's okay, but I at least should document what I'm doing and why I'm doing that. But behavior first, let's go back. We want to go to a task, and I'll just follow this all the way from beginning to end. And let's go down to one that's just kind of dead in the middle. We'll pick task 78. And the previous task is 77. So ideally, when this flow is done, we should be deleting task 78 and then be dropped right back to task 77. So we're going to click this. It's now taking us to this confirm page, and we're deleting task 78. We'll delete it, and we're back at task 77. I think it did what we want. In the event, so let's think through the other edge case. That other edge case was there is no previous task. So what's going to happen? In that scenario, that's task 1. Let's just do it. What I'm predicting is it will show up just right back at the top of the page, and for reasons that should be evident as we go along. So we're going to click this, and note that in this URL right now it says dv5b, and then it has that task-dv5b, blah, blah, blah. So it's got the fragment pointed to the same task, and then we click over here, it stayed the same. And that makes sense because we only modified in place this next URL if there was a previous task. So after this gets deleted, it's still going to use that fragment of task dv5b, but that task will be gone. And when the fragment doesn't match anything on the HTML page, it doesn't have anywhere to jump to, so it's just going to start at the top. That's what I believe is going to happen. So we can verify this. And there it is. It says dv5b up here, but there is no dv5b, so it doesn't show it. And we could confirm, we can go to the page source and search for dv. Oh, interesting. There is, what is that? Oh. That was from Django debug toolbar, the last location. Okay, cool. So aside from Django debug toolbar, which is what's showing this referrer from the HTTP link, the actual page itself should not have dv5b. dv5, yeah, there's only one hit for that, and that's coming from the debug toolbar. Okay, cool. I think this is the behavior that we want. So let's document it. Let's write the test, make sure the coverage is good, and declare this particular issue done. And let's see if we have time to move on to another one. So let's say, well, we already have this little bit of description. So let's say some part of the URL may have the current task outside of the URL fragment. Thus, we must use our knowledge of the fragment name include that prefix, to ensure a single replacement. I don't need to tell myself this will break. That's not going to be informative to me. I know it'll break. I would just be explaining it again, but I know, and now you know. But that's a good enough description to say, like, why is it this? Because I could see myself like a year from now being like, why didn't I just drop task dash? That seems excessive. Okay, so that is done. Let's go over here now and let's confirm that we're missing coverage. I'm 99% certain that we will be, but I guess there's always this chance that I have some test that's surprising me. Oh. Well, that's interesting. Where did that error come from? We'll get to that later. Passing unsaved model instances to related filters is deprecated? Interesting. Okay, so it's telling us we are missing lines 586 through 597. Sound familiar? 586 through 597. And in order to get this one as well, we're going to want to put a previous task in there. So we're done with the template. Let's go to the courses test views, and we want to go to the course. There's a reason for that, Giant. Like, it's not because. All right. Well, here's my reason for 100% test coverage. It's because I'm a team of one, and I want confidence, and like, I basically don't want this app to bother me. I don't want to get a bunch of rollbar exceptions or anything like that. So my working theory is that if I can get 100% unit test coverage on the project, that it's kind of acting as like my QA team, my automated QA team. And yeah, that's been why I've done it. And it was doable because I started at that point. Like if I had an existing app, it would have been a little unrealistic to do that. But that's how it ended up this way. And you can see, like, the app is not so big that it's such a problem. Like, there's only, what is this? Where'd the number of tests go? There's only 485 tests. 16 warnings? What? All right. We're going to totally check that out next. That's annoying. Removed in Django 5. Okay. One thing at a time. Okay, so here we are. We're at the test course task update. I want to... We want to now get the delete URL. That's totally a thing that we can do. Oh man, this is an old test case. Yeah, more eyes in the code. That's right, John. How old is this? Dang. All right. It's like as old as the project, which makes sense. It's a pretty core page that I needed. I look at this and I can immediately tell by looking at one thing that I changed about my test. Because I'm doing 100% coverage, I realized that there are some tests that I don't need to have. Like, you can see this test get, right? One of the things that I did with a lot of my future test cases is I have a bunch of tests in my old test that have this kind of style of test has course, test has grade levels. Essentially, I'm asserting for things in the context. And often unnecessarily. Like, so I want the assertion in the context because I want to document the contract that my template code expects for my view. That's why I'm doing it. But I realized I can do that in one test. And so maybe this is an opportunity to clean up these tests and like kill this. We can totally kill this one. Probably kill the one below it. Probably can't do it for all of them, but a good number of them are just duplicate. Do I have a rule of thumb on splitting? No, not really. I'm sort of the mindset, like you can see, look at my line position. I'm in line 990 over here. So if I was, my brain can't remember the whole app super easily. Like I remember huge chunks of it. But if I can instead prefer, like, I know regardless of size that my course views tests are going to be in my course test views file, and I don't have to think about it, and I use search to guide me to the area, then from my perspective, the size of the file doesn't matter as much. So I can get to the right test case because I'm pretty consistent on the test naming conventions. Essentially, I take the name of the class or the name of the function and I prefix it with test so I can jump right to it. So here we got course task update view, test course task update view. It's a pretty boring convention, but it's very workable. And so it gets me to the right area. And then as far as like actually running tests and stuff, I've gone over this a few times in other streams, but I have a plugin in Vim that with a couple shortcut keys, I can run my test right from the file and right from wherever my cursor is. So if I want to run all of the tests for this particular view, I come up to the actual class name and run the same command, and it will run all of that class's view tests. So that has worked for me, but I understand everybody operates differently, and if you break it up at 600 lines, more power to you. That's a reasonable size, I think, for a test file. Yeah, Walson, you say you do it just for the whole context. Yeah, that's why I'm looking at this. This thing's old, and I think it could probably collapse. So what was that? 7, 8 tests, 9? I mean, they're still pretty fast, but I could probably drop half of them, and that speed starts to add up over time. For the moment, I think we can probably go ahead and use this get test and put the check for delete there. Should we do that? Does that make sense? I don't know if it's going to get the coverage we want, because that's going to get here. So this is a context where I'm actually testing more, because this delete URL method is doing more. So it may not make sense to stuff it all into a single test. Like if the context is really simple, like you're going to need it every time. For example, there's no conditional logic that's going to have this, and the object has to have a course. It's going to be there. So I could let's just do that. Let's change it to the style that I like now. So we're going to say assert self get context. Whoops. Assert self get context. And then from the context, you give it the key, and the key is going to be course. And we're going to say that it equals to course. That should make that pass. And now we can delete this test right here. One down. All right. And then now see, here's where it starts to get a little messy, is like that first test get doesn't have all the data necessarily. So the list of grade levels, well, that's not true. Here's a list right here. There's a grade level. Okay. But this one is there anything different about this? The grade levels for selection matches the grades that have the course. All right, there's probably it's still not a good enough doc string, but there's some extra logic in here that I did this for a certain way, but I'll leave that. So I eliminated one test. I could probably do more if I cared more, but it's not important enough to me. We've got the redirect URL right there. There's got some stuff about grading. There's actually a fair amount, surprising amount in this particular page. Where do I want to put this? Should we put it at the bottom? Let's do that. So test get delete URL, and we'll say the delete URL has the task fragment of the previous task. That's really what we want to be asserting on. If that's true, then we're in a good spot. All right, so let's start. Let's just steal from this first area as just a basis point, and I don't need to do a get check 200. I could just do a get. I don't need to assert on this. It's definitely going to do a 200, and we can get rid of the method name there. So that there's nothing shocking in here so far. That test runs just fine, but there's no asserts, so it's just running the code at that point. But we want to get the delete URL and then poke at it. So let's do delete URL and self get context delete URL. This is also doing the proof that the delete URL is in the context. So we could, as a basic test, say assert that the delete URL is not none. It's kind of a dumb test, and I'll probably get rid of that assertion in just a moment. But as a starting point, good. So we got some stuff in there. And now let's say, what do we want to say? So we want to find. Ultimately, we want another task. So let's do this. We've got our previous task. And just because the way Factory Boy works, like these are happening chronologically and they're creating records chronologically. So the IDs, this will be in fact the previous task before this one. It's just happening in serial. So what we really want to assert is, I want to assert that somewhere in the URL that we've got is the previous task ID with that task fragment in front of it. That's the test. So assert that task previous task ID is in the delete URL. It's kind of it's a crude test. It's not exactly getting the structure right, but I think it's getting to the heart of what we care about. And we don't even need that local variable. Like, we're not doing anything else. So we can just do get context on delete URL. So now let's delete these two lines. That's the whole test, I think. But I want to do a little bit. Oh, that's not going to work. Let's try it. It should fail. Okay. Why did it fail? It failed because we didn't actually go into this if block. We need to add a next URL to this in order to get something that will trigger this path. And this next URL has to have that task fragment in it, or it won't find anything to replace. So that we're setting up more preconditions to make this look more like our real scenario data. But I just forgot about that. So let's steal from here. And let's drop it here. Whoops, I missed the next URL. Okay, we're getting this set up pretty closely. And now we need to be sure to correct this to be a get on the URL rather than the reverse we had a moment ago. So it's still not going to work because it's still not there, but we're getting closer. You can see, so it's failing on the assertion. It still doesn't find task, and this must be the previous ID. But it does have next and another location. So what we need to do to this next URL is put the current task ID in it. So it needs to look like, that's going to be an F string, and it needs to look like, let's put it in the right format of task and then task.id. What? What'd I do? Why did that not work? Where's the fragment? Why is it not on there? Another location. Another location. What's going on here? What am I not seeing? Now I'm puzzled. Test. We're on the right test. It says next URL right here. We're adding it right there. What the heck? But this is delete URL is definitely not the same. Oh. I see. No, I don't see. I thought it didn't put the query string on there. What's going on here? We've got this. This is the URL that we're passing in. It has get. You know what I bet it is? I bet the local client is parsing that as not part of next. It's probably saying like, yeah, I think we need to encode this. Yeah. Y'all see what that is? So I think what's happening is I'm wanting in my head for this to be one thing, right? But what's really happening is all of that's getting jammed together, and so the another location part is binding to the query string variable next, but the task fragment is binding to the URL overall. So really what's required here is to encode this into whatever the URL encoding is for a hash mark. And that way, at that point, it will look like part of the next query string, which is required because that's what next URL gets processed by. And so essentially what was happening is when it was doing this pull on next out of the query dictionary, it wasn't pulling the query string, the HTML fragment along with it. Kind of weird. Well, not surprising, but what's weird is I don't know why the Django side worked. That's what I'm confused about. Like over here, unless that hash mark is URL encoded, but we looked at the source of this page and I don't think it was. Maybe it actually might be on this page. So let's go to the page source. That might be the trick. I might have had this problem in the past. Yep, there it is. %23. Yep. Thanks, Jeffrey. Yeah, that's what's happening. Wouldn't it be nice to have a property called fragment ID in the task model? Let me think on that, Walson. That might be. Let me think on that for a moment. Let's get the test passing, and we'll kind of like. There's a couple things that I left on the stack that we need to get back to, like the I want to get that deprecation warning, but that's an interesting idea of a fragment ID check, so that I'm not building that over and over again. Yeah, exactly. Why testing matters. Well, it's kind of funny that the test is the flaw here. So my listing page. So if we went back and looked at the course listing page, I probably have this as encoded and probably encountered this problem. And maybe, actually, let's do a search. Oh, Vim, are you going to yell at me? Because that's percent means something in Vim. Let's see. Yeah. Yeah, look for the file name. All right, shut up, Vim. Stop doing that. How about escaping that? So, couldn't find %23 in the project. Maybe, which means maybe I never tested it. No, it still can't find it. Yeah, it did give me pause. You're right, Jeffrey. Good point. And also, I'm not convinced that it's not actually showing up in here. I think that ripgrep is maybe just failing to find the thing that I want. I'm gonna try single quotes. No? Man. Vim is escaping weirdly. Oh, okay. One more. I got it. I got this. So let's do just %23, no quote marks. I give up. Okay. Because it's definitely there now. Like, I saved this file. It should be finding this. What if we just search for 23? It's finding that instance. It's in a migration. Oh, I put it in the template itself. That's how I did it. So I probably don't ever test it explicitly like we're doing here. That's the other advantage of moving this logic, which was in a template, into Python. Because I'm not real great about testing my templates, to be honest. I do a much better job of actually testing the Python code. So it's good to catch this and like kind of codify it in a way that's visible. All right, so now I believe this test will pass. It's my speculation. Good, it did. In order to confirm, like just to give us the peace of mind that this chunk of code is actually doing what we think it's doing, we can comment it out for a moment. The test should fail. This is kind of just proving that my assert is actually like valid, although we've kind of executed this a few times to prove that that's the case. But you can definitely see there's none of the processing at all of the delete URL. It doesn't have any of the next URL stuff in it. So I'm pretty convinced that we did the right thing here. And let's go back to our test suite, run the whole thing, and see how it did. All right, we got 100% code coverage. Woohoo! We cleaned up a test, moved an assert. We actually come out as a net zero test gain, which is good. Like you want to have good coverage, but you don't need. There's no point in having just tests for test's sake. So if a test is not doing something, get rid of it. And then we spent all that time on just this little section. It turned out to be much more challenging than I realized. And the template cleanup was nice and simple, though. You know, it left something behind that's pretty nice. Okay, let's consider two things. Let's try and figure out this whatever's going on. I just upgraded to Django 4.1, so we may not be able to do anything about the warning summary, but notice, actually, it did pass on me. So why did it not? I thought I had my suite configured to fail on warnings, but it definitely gave me a passing grade here. Didn't like, because I can tell because I've got my editor, or sorry, my terminal to set up to show a red arrow if the previous command was a failure, and a green arrow if the command was success. So the fact that it got through that and it did not fail on the warnings means that I must not have that target set up properly. So I've got this fast coverage thing here, what I called this, PyTest. I'm going to make sure that I'm somewhere testing that this would fail. So here's my CI version of this, and it does make coverage, but it also does not, let's just running PyTest with these flags. Why is it not, did I really forget? Well, phooey. There's a way to set PyTest to be like persnickety about warnings, which is not what I want. Like I want, just like I want high code coverage, I want my stuff to be complaining about things. So I thought I had set this as an option, but it appears that I did not. So let's see. Let's search for this. PyTest, I think it's a -W or something. PyTest warnings as errors. I think it's like Python with a -W or how to capture warnings. And that's not it. I think it was that second result. Or maybe it's just Simon's got a good blog. Filter warnings. Okay. Oh, you know what it is? Oh, son of a gun. I bet that I changed this once upon a time. Like I eventually, at some point in the past, I cleared out all of my errors and had nothing in there. And so it was an empty list. So I probably deleted that error thing thinking that it did what I want, not realizing that that actually killed off my checking to treat warnings as errors. So let's try adding this. This is a TOML syntax rather than the standard PyTest INI file syntax. Let's see if that changes this so that we'll turn these back into errors. And that also explains how this exception got in there. Aha, there it is. Look at it. Yeah. So I was puzzled as how this even happened, because I thought I had the setting on, and what must have happened is within the last week, so September the 1st, I have Dependabot set up to go monthly, and Django 4.1 was released in the intervening month from when I did stuff, and I upgraded to 4.1 because Dependabot passed. But here I am now, stuck in this spot where clearly there was a warning that was in my code that I had not addressed, and I need to fix it. So this is sort of separate from the problem at hand. So what I'm going to do is delete this for a moment, and we're going to declare this feature that we were working on done. Although no, let's come back to that Wallison. Is it? I guess you have a Felipe looks like a Spanish name. So is it Wallison? Wallison? Sorry if I'm butchering your name. I apologize. Let's come back to your thought about fragment ID. Let's see how big of a problem this, how many times this appears, and if it would be useful for the context that we need it in. So let's search for task dash. So we could imagine so there are some spots that if we had a property, we could replace that with, it'd still be an F string, but instead of task dash, it would be task, percent or ampersand. Nope, not ampersand. Hash, octothorpe, £, whatever you want to call it. It would look like, instead of this, you'd do task.fragment ID and then drop that stuff. It would look like that. How many instances of this do we have? 35. Okay. Okay. Oh, bummer. So it's not always so easy, apparently. Like there's sometimes where it needed to be filtered by student as well. That doesn't solve that. So we can't do it universally. And apparently some of these are in package lock. Oh, Jeffrey, I see. Sorry, I didn't see your question there. I'll get to it in just a second. So it does seem like there are places where that could help. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, not tonight. It's a good idea. I appreciate their suggestion. And I will add it to my list over here. So that was the course task. Add course task fragment ID property. This would be a consistent way of saying task ID, and would clean up views and templates. Oh, your English has been totally fine. Don't worry about it at all. Like I have not misunderstood anything you've typed. So you're doing a great job. You're killing it compared to my Spanish. Let's put it that way. I'm sorry, I don't. Then you maybe didn't say Spanish, so I'm making some assumptions. That's my bad. You might not be a Spanish speaker. All right, but appreciate the suggestion. Getting back to the question about PyTest over unit test. Portuguese? Could be, yeah. A romance language of some kind, right? So why PyTest? I don't take advantage of a lot of the features of PyTest, but there's some that I really like about it. And the biggest one, oh, he's from Brazil. Okay. The biggest one is assert, plain assert. If you look at my test code, and if you look at some of these tests that I had, and actually we deleted some, and I switched the style in this test. Let's come back up to one of the older tests and see if we can compare. I might have already gotten rid of it. Yeah, I must have killed it off with that removal of that has course thing. But for me, what this really comes down to is like plain assert tends to read nicer to me. So I actually, if you search for, I don't know if it's still true, and I don't have. Let's see. Can I do a private window so I can see if I can go into YouTube without bringing up all my YouTube history, because it's going to skew the results. And so we're on YouTube as just strange anonymous person and PyTest 101. Hey, there I am. So this is a presentation I gave at my meetup. I run the local meetup here in Frederick, Maryland. For Python, and I gave a presentation. And if you watch that video, you don't have to if you know PyTest. It really is what it says it is. It's PyTest 101. At some point, I flash up 2 slides, and one slide shows a bunch of equality and comparison statements. Hey, Quatley, welcome. Glad you're able to join in this evening. So one slide shows the comparisons of like equality checks or in or greater than or less than, and then the next slide shows all of those exact same set of comparison statements with assert slapped in front of them. And what I'm illustrating to that crowd is that, hey, you've just learned the majority of the PyTest API. And the point I was trying to make in the slide is that just knowing assert frees you from learning a lot of different methods that are attached to test case. In comparison, Python unit test, and I'm not here to dump on unit test. Like I used to use unit test. It's solid, but I as a criticism, there you have to learn methods all in this style. And so you don't get to just learn one keyword. You have to learn assert false, assert true, assert not equal, assert equal. And then you have to memorize, like, was it equal or equals? Because that's a thing. And one of them will now complain at you, although I think they might have gotten rid of it in one of the versions of Python 3. So maybe it's not an issue anymore, but it used to be. And it'll kind of yell at you saying, like, you can't do this anymore. So anyway, it's got a larger API surface area. So that's one thing. The other is kind of comes down to the richness of the PyTest ecosystem. I think it has a lot of good tools for Django or for all libraries really. There's a bunch of cool stuff. I don't know if I use much on this particular project, but if we go and look at the dev requirements, what's in here? Yeah, so there's some good examples in here. So there's easy parallelization. That might be something that unit tests can do now. I don't know. I've not looked at the default test runner anymore. But and Django itself provides good test tools for unit tests. So if you're using the default test case, you don't necessarily need something like PyTest Django. But there are some conveniences that come by using this. But here's one that would not be as easy to do in straight up unit test. I've got my test suite configured so that if anything tries to call out to the internet, it will fail. That's what PyTest socket does. Essentially interrupts all outbound or any network traffic and says, you just tried to make a network connection. No. And the point of that is to help isolate the test suite so that it adds consistency. So forget about the, like, you're on an airplane thing, because in my life, I'm rarely running test suites on an airplane. But it's more about stability of not making connections to external services and servers that could fail. That's why I add this. And so you start to get packages that are like this. And again, this project doesn't have a bunch of them. You can see I only am using a handful of PyTest extension packages, but it doesn't take long. Like if I was able to show you my works code, which I can't because it's all proprietary, but you would see that the number of PyTest specific packages that we use is quite lengthy to do a lot of things that come about as your projects get larger. So for me, that's why I like PyTest. There's a fair amount that I just kind of throw away. Yeah, PyTest socket is pretty rocking, and it wasn't even that hard to set up. And you'd be surprised. Like I set this up at work because we were having this problem. We were like, where are these connections coming from? And it was causing like weird failures in the test suite. And this is a suite that must pass for every PR that we have at work. And the suite has 40,000 tests in it and stuff. But if you have one failure because of some network service being down, well, you got to rerun your PR again. It may have had nothing to do with your code change. So it was a good stability addition. Wallace, you mentioned PyTest fixtures. I do like PyTest fixtures. So here's where my particular setup in this project has some trouble. And that is I'm using the Django test case class. And I'm doing that for a couple reasons. So if we actually look at homeschool test, you can see I'm not actually using Django test case. So it's kind of a lie. What I'm really using is Django. You're welcome, Jeffrey. I'm really using Django Test Plus, and Test Plus is a layer that's built on top of the Django test case. And actually, you can see it from the help string there, the Django test case. That added some stuff like get check 200 and some just convenience methods that make certain kinds of assertion easy. What the trade-off with that is, because it's based on the unit test case class, PyTest doesn't play 100% nicely with unit test. We can search for what? I think it's just PyTest unit test will probably get us the page that we want. There is a section on here about working with unit test-based test cases, And it shows you somewhere down this list, I think it's down towards the bottom, talking about fixtures. And fixtures are definitely harder to use with a unit test class. It can be done, but you can't just like inject them in the same PyTest style. So if I wanted to take advantage of fixtures as they come from PyTest directly, I'd have to do some other work, or I'd have to write a test function like, test my thing, and then, get a fixture like the request factory or the client or anything that comes from PyTest Django. But I've tried to attach a lot of those features that I need to the test case class and take advantage of stuff from Test Plus that most of the time I don't need those things. So that's worked out for me. Hopefully that answers why PyTest. All right, so where are we? I created that issue for the fragment ID. It's a good idea. We might be able to refactor it in a future session. Let's go ahead and commit this change. Oh, I've got some package updates, so hold on. I've got to update black here. All right, and then when this is the delete a task returns to the previous task on the course list. And it fixes, what was the number? Fixes 702. Okay, now let's see if we can actually fix this problem, or if I'm going to have to ignore some errors. So I want to get back to the warnings that we were seeing, and so the easiest way to do that is go to the Py project and turn on errors. Now I'm gonna leave a comment this time so I don't stupidly remove this in the future, because I suspect it used to be here. I really do. Enable warnings as errors. That's really what we're after. That's what that's going to do. And let's run the suite. Let's see if it can give us an example. We'll narrow it down to a single test, and then we'll go. I think it's all the same problem, and it's possible. Let's look at a couple to see if they're the same sort of problem. Check breaks. Check breaks. I'm seeing a lot. It might be one fix. Check breaks. There could be one place that I messed it up. Might be multiple, but so all right, let's go to one of these tests and use it as an example. Test start school year. Nope. Test start school year. And we want to test valid submission. And this should give us the exception. Check breaks again. So the warning says passing unsaved model instances to related filters is deprecated. Now, I think that this message is probably enough that we could search for this. And this is one of the times I've been using DuckDuckGo a lot, but I do feel there are some things that I'm willing to let Google invade my privacy because they do a better job. And one of those things is searching for error messages. So all I did was I copied the whole message and searched for it, because Django, you developers are awesome. They're good about putting like notes about what's changing, and this is an example. What was the rest of that message? Passing unsaved. Now, well, it's a single bullet point, so there might not be as much here as oftentimes. this Oftentimes this information is good, and maybe they felt like this was enough to describe it. My sense is like when you've got a deprecation warning, you kind of want to know what's the context of why this is. So let's read it. I've just been reading it to you. I've not actually been internalizing what it really says. So let's read it and see if I can internalize it and then actually try and fix the problem. So passing unsaved model instances to related filters is deprecated. So I have something that is maybe, well, it sounds like it's not saved yet. Does that mean it's not saved in this instance? Like it's a dirty model record? Or does it mean like it's a brand new one and has no ID, so there's nothing to filter yet? That's what I don't know. Let's go take a look. It seems to be stemming from check breaks. Let's go look over there. And this is going to be hard to see side by side because one of the downsides of my in-editor experience is that I usually want to be kind of modal with it, just like my Vim editing, where I want to be looking at the test output and then kind of process it and then look at the code. But sometimes when I'm in this more exploratory setting, I want to be able to reference the thing, the actual test output. So in this context, I think what I want to do is run this again, and this will be homeschool core tests test. What is that? Views? I'm pretty sure it was views. And we need the class name. And we need test valid submission, I think was the test name. So that way it'll let us have the test on one side, and then I can flip back to my other terminal on the other. So let's go look at where check breaks is defined, where that filter is actually happening. So this is schools forms. What line was that? 209. So this is the instance. I wonder, okay. Is that school year not saved? Yeah, it's creating. I think that's the scenario. Let's do a print. Let's print the instance, which is probably going to be the school year object that it's creating. And let's print self instance ID. I'm not afraid to do some print debugging. Sometimes it's just faster. What? Those things don't have. So the instance, this is like a really raw instance. School year. None. School year ID is really what it is. So this is definitely an unsaved school year, and it's doing a filter on that. So of course, it's not going to return anything. So really, I think the fix is this must be used in a couple of contexts, and this must also be used in a context where you can edit the school year. Well, let's see this form. This is the school year form. So you can edit the school year as well. And so I think the fix in this context, in order to satisfy this equation, this failure, is to make sure that this check is only happening if it's a real school year. And that makes sense. Like there's not going to be any breaks that match up with an instance that doesn't exist yet, because the school break that is associated has a foreign key on school year that is not nullable. So this could never work with an instance that has no ID, which is why this code has worked so far. Like this is always going to return false for the new case. But I think what it's saying is for Django 5, we're going to be a little bit more explicit and say like, no, you can't just pass in something that is not a real instance at all. I don't know why they opted to make that decision. I guess it's technically more correct. It seemed like it would be following Postal's law a little better to have allowed it, but I'm sure there's some more complicated decision logic behind that dictates this. So there's an easy way to fix that, and we can add an extra conditional on here. So we only want to do this if the instance already has an ID. If it's none, we just skip it. So we'll say if you have an ID and then do the existence check. We can delete those prints. Let's try the test again, see if it passes. Ooh, it did not. Do I have another one of these? Now I have it on 218. So we've done a couple of these. So yeah, it's the same problem. Maybe we just bail out here if it's none. Would be a smarter play rather than trying to put it on both of these if checks, because these are happening serially and they're raising errors if they're there. But again, it's the same problem. There's no instance. So let's do a guard clause, and that bails out early. And that will keep this looking simpler like that. And so we can say if self instance .id is none, then we just return, because there's nothing to do. And then I'll add a comment. This is a new instance, so checking for breaks doesn't make sense. And it looks like I already did that down here. I don't know why I had it in one place but not the other. Maybe it was giving me some kind of other error for that. Okay, so let's try the test again. Now the test passed. And we saw that on a bunch of these test failures. So maybe that was it for all of them. That would be awesome. But even if it wasn't, we probably knocked out a bunch. Okay, we got one left. Oh, well, that's not good. Boo, boo, boo. What did you do there? PyTest unraisable exception warning? Oh, geez. Test PDF dashboard, test staff. What the heck? Is that replicable? Oh, you know what? It was probably another warning that was hiding in there that we weren't seeing because of this being commented out. Like, I bet if we do that, run this again, that test is going to pass along with the others. So we have apparently two categories of errors in here. So let's do this. This is test PDF. This could be an actual like problem. I suspect it is. If it's complaining about some file handle that I'm not closing, this doesn't surprise me. Unclosed file. Now I don't know if the code, if maybe the bug is in my code or in like the actual product code, or maybe it's in my test. It would be better if it's in the test, but if it's not in the test, then here's a scenario where it's showing me a real problem, a real resource problem in the code that wasn't being caught earlier. So it's a good thing to check. So let's go to the test, and it was in, where was this? Test PDFs dashboard. PDFs dashboard. What? Come on. How can I run the one test and it works? Is this something that's not going to work unless it's a bunch of tests that are triggering a cleanup? That would be annoying. That's definitely the view, right? Test PDFs dashboard. Let's make that fast coverage verbose. So we're making sure we get the right place. That was apparently not the verbose output that I thought it was. Is it VV? Oh, come on, PyTest. What's your verbose option? -V. What the heck? Verbose should not have done the dot runner. Should have done like each test would have gotten a thing. Oh, then I have quiet at the end. All right, my fault. So make it verbose for a moment. There we go. Oh, where did that red go? I saw it. There it is. Oh, look at, no, that's not good. Are you jumping around now? Look where it failed. That's on an authorizer. Shoot. It moved. Son of a gun. All right, so we've got a file handle leak somewhere in the code. Now this is it's no longer a deterministic place, it's now a mystery. Let's try running it again, see if it moved. At least it stays in the same spot. It's probably like the fact that I'm running it in quiet mode is causing it to trigger on the staff one. A lot of this is probably fairly deterministic in its flow. But what we're really getting at here is there's a leak in the file handle somewhere in this code. And we've got some hint, thankfully. And the hint is that this is coming from one of the bundles. This is in the PDF code. Let's go check it out. I would like this to be clean. it probably really is a leak somewhere in the application. Thankfully, this is not a feature that's being used all the time, so it's not a big deal. Again, it might also be just in the test code and not in the application, but I don't know. I'm going to return this to quiet so I don't forget it. And we'll run it one more time. Probably see it move back to that staff page that it was complaining about. It's funny how that can be so consistent. Still a bundle, but now we're looking at, oh, it's still complaining about the same spot. And this spot definitely does not run a bundle. So that's not comparable. Like, that's not where we should be looking. Resource leaks, good times. PDFs, that's where we need to go. Or test PDFs may also be the place where the problem is. It's one test, but it's not the only thing that makes the bundle. Let's first narrow it down to, we know that the problem is coming from an unclosed file handle when generating a bundle. And we can inspect that code in a minute, but I want to see, my first goal is to see how many places are actually calling this make bundle thing. Like, is it just this one test that's calling make bundle, or is there a couple of them? I suspect there might actually be a couple. Well, the easiest way to do this is insert some kind of exception here. So I'm going to do 1 divided by 0. And then I'm going to run this again. And now it should be raising exceptions there. It's going to catch perhaps multiple tests. So that's kind of bizarre. This is really bizarre to me, actually, because we've got something in this make bundle thing at the top of that, and yet somehow it's still creating a zip file that is raising the exception. What in the world just happened there? Oh, maybe it's... No. I was going to say, this should raise an exception right here and prevent these lines from ever running. I'm pretty sure. Assert. One is not 2. I don't know. My brain is starting to run out of good ideas for naming things. That's actually going to be true. So yeah, really bad ideas. Assert false. There we go. That's what I was looking for. Wow, really? B. Okay. Gosh, more things to just clean up. I can't clean them all up tonight, but that should not be happening. Anyway, yeah, so it's raising the division by 0 error. So this bundle call is not the spot that's raising, that has the file leak, because none of this code is running. It never gets a chance to run. Yet somehow, let's run it one more time. Zero division error, and then this other bundle. Could be What could it be? Where could you be? Do they school your object? I think, or that's like a, what is this ID? Something is trying to make a bundle. That's what this is. Well, this is puzzling, y'all. Because it seems like this is the only place that that would come in. Maybe not. Oh. Wait a minute. This is a zip file. This bundle is the zip data. So notice what I'm doing here is this thing is not actually creating the file. This thing is creating the data into a bytes.io object. And then it's calling, down at the bottom, it calls get buffer. So essentially it's building all of the data in memory. But that's not the problem. It's the closing of the file that's the problem. And the file that wasn't closed was an actual zip file. Right here. So it tells me that it's the place that's problematic is wherever that .zip file is really being created, which I think is a view. There it is. Store. So we've got a content file. We save it. Maybe I need to close the content file? I don't remember the API well enough on content file to know if that's right or not. But that seems like a likely place where the problem is. So let's come back up here. I'm now pretty convinced that it's not here. I don't remember what calls store. Yeah, I did notice that as well, that I'm not using with, which is a good observation. But content file is a Django thing, so I don't know if it uses a context manager or not. It's like a wrapper around the file object that's meant to use with the content, the system. I'm not saying that very well. So let's go find it. I used with at the call to that. Sorry, I'm missing what line you're referring to. Apologies. My brain runs out of steam after a couple of hours of streaming. I'm going to keep pressing on here a little bit though. Content file. 5. Are you referring to like 5 up in this store method? Is that what you're referring to, Jeffrey? Which file are you talking about? Are you talking about reports models, or are you talking about reports PDFs, or are you talking about the test file? Yeah, line 5 might be a misnomer. Make bundle. You're saying with zip file. So yeah, the zip file. So we have a with here, right? And it is a zip file. And the fact that we have the zip file and it closes is okay. That should release the resource. You're right. But like I said, noted earlier, look at this. This is the important line in that line 27 is a bytes IO. So it's in memory. So there's no file, there's no actual file handle taking place here with the zip file. So there's nothing to release. And then if we look over here and at the more specific thing, it is complaining about the actual file name, which we didn't describe in make bundle at all. There was no reference to .zip. So the only place to .zip is down here in this store method. That's the only place in the whole code that mentions .zip. So my suspicion is that content file needs to be closed, because content file probably under the hood is creating a real file like object, and then I didn't close it properly. Maybe I assumed that save was going to close it, but maybe that's a bad assumption on my part. So let's do, I don't know which one of these it goes in. So let's open all three and search for content file and see if it has a close on it. Content file class inherits from file, but unlike file, it operates on string content rather than actual file. So that's feeling like, I mean, the fact that it says it inherits from file tells me that it's probably a context manager kind of thing. File class is a thin wrapper around the Python file object. It has open, can be used as a context manager, so that's probably what I'm missing, and close. So I could either use it as a context manager, or well, how would I, this is the weird part, is like, what am I opening? I'm like creating a new one here. So what is this open actually doing? So maybe it's a, and this is definitely something, this is one of those corner areas of the app that after this is, even if I get this right, I should most certainly test it to make sure that this is still working as I expect it to. Because this is something that a unit test is not going to catch well. So if I put all of this inside of with block, maybe? What if I say this? Content file is equal to, oops. Join those. Doesn't feel right. I was gonna do with content file dot open, but why would I do that? And then could replace self report, but that's a different thing at that point. It's not the same thing. And then do some, well, let me finish the thought so we see what's in my head. Something like this. But what's bothering me is I don't understand why this would be the case. Like, I don't understand why we would open it to put it into the report. That feels wrong. Like, I feel like I'm misunderstanding content file, which doesn't put me in a good mental state of mind here. Yeah. Didn't solve the problem anyway. Okay. Maybe, because the report data is just some bytes. That's not something to close. Let's back that change out. I'm not confident in that at all. So I'm gonna get rid of that stuff for a moment. Leave it as is. So one thing I could do is perhaps after report or after the save, what if I call close? forget the context manager for a minute, because the context manager really is probably a fancy wrapper around calling close. What does that do? I still don't feel like I understand what's going on, but does that solve the resource issue? No, it does not. So I think content file, though, has the underlying file object. But then they give this scary warning. So here was my thought. I was thinking, what if I did this, where after I've saved, I go in and close the file handle directly? What does that do? That seems like it's going to close whatever file was written there, but it doesn't. Well, phooey. Now, this is where I start to question, am I getting the right place? How can we test that theory? That one I think was pretty easy to test. We could test that by saying, forget this, we're never going to save it. Let's just not save it, or not create it at all. And we'll get some different exceptions, but we shouldn't get the resource warning if I'm in the right area. If I'm in the wrong area, then we need to look at other things. Yeah, no more resource warning. Okay. Let's build it up line by line. See if I get the resource warning now that I've got the content file in there. I don't. So maybe the creation of the content file by itself is not really doing anything. Let's bring save back in. I'm sure save is the one that's actually triggering the work. This is going to be the wrong status, so there's going to be another failure. But I should hopefully see the resource warning. Bummer. Are those asserts might be masking? Here's might be the test though. Test stores report data. Let's check that one out. Test bundle stores report data. That could be the broken test. Let's restore this. Should be back to this, and then we'll look at that particular test. Okay, we're back to the resource warning. Let's look for that reports test. Let's keep the model over here. And I'm pretty convinced that it's not in the bundle generation itself. Oh, look at that. It's the test. Read the test, Matt. So there's nothing wrong with my code. The content file closed it properly with save, I'm sure. But here's a read with no close on it. And that's explaining why it's showing its mode as read binary rather than write. If we switch this to be with bundle report open as just to say as f, and then say f.read, I think this will now do what it should supposed to do. Tricky tricksters there. There it is. Okay. Well, that's encouraging that it wasn't my code. So Django is doing the right thing and saving and closing the resource as it should, which I think was part of I'm pretty sure I spent a lot of time reading this documentation trying to understand it and trying to understand file uploads and file handling. And they talked about the storage class and what it's supposed to do. And I'd read all the fields. So I was surprised to see this error message. But this makes perfect sense of why it complained. Is we called read, it opened the file handle, but we never closed it. Okay. So we are back to a state where we fixed all of the warnings. That's good. Fix. Fix PyTest. I guess they're not PyTest warnings. Fix all warnings and enable warnings as errors in PyTest. All right. That's gonna. I'm calling it. That's where we're gonna end for tonight. Appreciate you all joining in. This has been fun. Good discussion. Lots of thought-provoking conversation there. So thank you for joining in. If you don't mind, do me a favor, give me a thumbs up on the video if you're still hanging around and chatting. I'd be appreciative of that. Next time, what is next time? We'll do some stuff. I don't know. There's plenty to do on the app. I don't know if we'll bite off a bigger feature or if we'll try and tackle more of these bugs, because as you can see, what I thought was going to be like a 20-minute fix on a bug turned out to be, or I guess an enhancement turned out to be like an hour and a half. So testing did save the day twice. There's a good value in learning about the test suite and really getting comfortable with tests. And also, I hope I learned some stuff tonight. I hope you did too. Learning about how to track down resource errors and that kind of stuff and see how code works. It's funny how that stuff processes. But again, thank you all for joining in. I do want to thank, I've got a bunch of patrons that support me on Patreon at patreon.com/mblayman if you'd like to join them. I want to say thank you to Rupert, Andrew, Dragos, Ryan, Patrick, Eric, Fred, Aaron, Philip, Miguel, Shivan, and Monty. Eventually, I will get a second monitor over here to kind of complete some of my setup and be able to monitor comments better and give you all more screen real estate, more importantly, to see more of what I'm doing and just continue to try and improve the stream. So I do take any contributions and I try and invest them back into the stream to improve things. But that's just a closing note to say thank you all for your support. I appreciate it. Hope you had fun, and I'll see you next time. Take care.